Welcome to the channel Error Coins Hub, and let me ask you something that might just change everything you thought you knew about pocket change. What if the spare pennies rattling around in your old jars, tucked away in forgotten drawers, or casually spent at the grocery store could actually be worth millions of dollars? Most people walk past these tiny copper discs every single day, tossing them into tip jars or leaving them on the counter because they seem worthless. But what they don't realize is that some of these coins are hiding secrets so valuable that collectors around the world would empty their bank accounts just for a chance to own one. Today we're diving deep into a coin that looks completely ordinary on the surface. A simple 1948 wheat penny that you might have seen 1,000 times before. But this particular penny has a story so extraordinary, so absolutely mind-blowing, that when it sold at auction, it shattered every record anyone could have imagined. We're talking about a staggering $8.7 million. Yes, you heard that right, $8.70 million for a single penny. And before you think this is some kind of joke or exaggeration, stick with me because I'm going to show you exactly why this coin commands such an astronomical price, what makes it different from every other 1948 penny out there, and most importantly, how you could potentially have one of these fortune makers hiding in your collection right now. But here's the thing, this 1948 wheat penny isn't the only treasure we're uncovering today, because after I reveal all the secrets of this multi-million-dollar coin, we're going to explore another penny from the early 1950s that has its own shocking value. A coin that has made ordinary people extraordinarily wealthy overnight. And trust me when I say you're going to want to stick around until the very end because the second coin we're covering has a twist that nobody sees coming. A detail so rare and so incredibly valuable that collectors literally dream about finding it. So let's get into this 1948 wheat penny and discover why it's worth more than most people's houses. The year 1948 was a fascinating time in American history. World War II had ended just 3 years earlier. The nation was experiencing unprecedented economic growth. Families were moving to the suburbs, television was becoming mainstream, and the United States Mint was working overtime to produce enough coins to keep up with the booming economy. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint were all striking millions upon millions of pennies. And the design they used was the iconic Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin that had been in production since 1909 and featured Abraham Lincoln's profile on the front and 2 wheat stalks on the reverse, symbolizing America's agricultural abundance. Now, under normal circumstances, a 1948 wheat penny is actually quite common. The Philadelphia Mint alone produced over 317 million of them that year. Denver added another 172 million. And San Francisco contributed 81 million, which means there are literally hundreds of millions of these coins out there in circulation, in collections, and scattered across the country. So why on earth would one particular 1948 penny be worth $8.70 million when hundreds of millions of others are worth just a few cents? The answer lies in something that coin collectors call errors, and not just any errors, but extraordinarily rare minting mistakes that occur maybe once in tens of millions of strikes. Mistakes so unusual that they create coins unlike anything else in existence. The 1948 wheat penny that sold for this astronomical price wasn't just a regular penny. It was a double die error of the most extreme kind, and to understand why this matters, you need to know how coins are made. When the mint produces a coin, they use a die, which is basically a metal stamp that has the design carved into it, and this die is pressed with tremendous force onto a blank metal disc called a planchet, transferring the design onto the coin. A double die error occurs when the die itself is made incorrectly, when the design is accidentally stamped onto the die twice but slightly offset, creating a doubling effect that then gets transferred to every coin struck with that die. Now, minor doubling can occur on many coins and might add a little value, but what we're talking about here is major doubling, the kind where you can see clear separation between the doubled images, where letters appear to have shadows, where dates look thick and bold, where every detail is dramatically duplicated in a way that's impossible to miss even with the naked eye. The 1948 wheat penny we're discussing had this extreme doubling on the obverse, meaning the front of the coin, where Lincoln's profile and the date are located. Imagine looking at the date 1948 and seeing every single digit doubled so perfectly that it looks like someone printed it twice. Imagine the word liberty appearing to have an echo, each letter standing out with bold, dramatic separation. Imagine, in God we trust, showing such clear doubling that it looks almost three-dimensional. This wasn't some subtle error that you'd need a magnifying glass to detect. This was a screaming, obvious, absolutely spectacular mistake that somehow made it through the mint's quality control and entered circulation. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. This particular error die was caught relatively quickly by mint officials, meaning only a tiny number of these dramatically doubled 1948 pennies ever made it out into the world. And over the decades since, most of them have been lost, spent, damaged, or destroyed, leaving only a handful in existence today. When collectors realized how rare this error was, when they understood that finding one of these coins was like winning the lottery 10 times over, the value started to climb. First to thousands of dollars, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and eventually, when a specimen in absolutely pristine condition came up for auction at a major numismatic event, bidding went wild. Collectors from around the world, people who had spent their entire lives searching for rare coins, museums with unlimited budgets, and wealthy investors who understood the value of owning something that virtually nobody else could ever possess. They all wanted this coin, and the price kept climbing higher and higher until finally, the hammer dropped at an absolutely jaw-dropping $8.70 million, making it one of the most expensive pennies ever sold in human history. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's an incredible story, but what are the chances I actually have one of these? And that's a fair question. The truth is, the odds are slim, but they're not zero, and that's what makes coin collecting so thrilling. People have found incredibly rare and valuable coins in the most unexpected places. In old piggy banks inherited from grandparents, in jars of change kept in basements for decades, mixed in with regular pennies at estate sales, even in circulation, still being spent at face value because the person holding it had no idea what they possessed. So how do you identify a 1948 double-die wheat penny? First, you need to examine the date very carefully. Get yourself a good magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe, something with at least 10x magnification, and look closely at each digit in 1948. If you have an authentic double-die error, you'll see clear doubling, not just a slight shadow or wear, but distinct separation where each number appears to have been stamped twice with a slight offset. Next, check the word liberty. On a genuine double die, each letter will show dramatic doubling, especially the vertical lines in letters like L, I, and T, and the curves in letters like B and R will appear thickened or shadowed. Then examine "In God We Trust" along the top of the coin. Again, you're looking for that unmistakable doubling effect where every letter stands out boldly. Also check Lincoln's profile itself, because extreme double-die errors often affect the entire design. So you might notice doubling in the details of his hair, his beard, or the lines of his coat. The mint mark is another crucial detail. The 1948 pennies were struck at Philadelphia, no mint mark, Denver, D, and San Francisco, S, and the mint mark appears on the front of the coin, just below the date. So if your coin has a mint mark, make sure to note which one because certain mint marks combined with certain errors can be worth exponentially more. Condition is everything when it comes to value. A 1948 double-die wheat penny that's been circulated heavily, that's worn smooth, scratched, corroded, or damaged will still be worth significant money if the error is genuine. But a coin in pristine, uncirculated condition, a coin that looks like it just came fresh from the mint with sharp details, original luster, and no contact marks, that's the coin that could command millions at auction. Professional grading is absolutely essential if you think you've found something valuable, Organizations like PCGS, Professional Coin Grading Service, and NGC Numismatic Guarantee Corporation employ expert numismatists who can authenticate your coin, verify whether the error is genuine, and assign it a numerical grade from 1 to 70 based on its condition. And this grade can make the difference between a coin worth a few $1,000s and one worth millions. But let's talk about some other fascinating aspects of 1948 wheat pennies that make this year particularly interesting to collectors. Beyond the ultra-rare double die error, there are other varieties and errors from 1948 that are worth watching for, including off-center strikes where the design is stamped partially off the planchet, creating a coin that's dramatically misaligned, repunched mint marks where the D or S was stamped multiple times in slightly different positions, and die cracks or die breaks that create raised lines or chunks of extra metal on the finished coin. Some collectors have also reported finding 1948 pennies struck on the wrong planchet, meaning a penny design struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination, like a dime or even a foreign coin, and these transitional errors or wrong planchet errors can be worth tens of thousands of dollars even without any doubling. The key is to examine every old penny you come across. Never assume that because something looks ordinary it is ordinary, because the entire hobby of numismatics is built on the understanding that sometimes the most valuable treasures are hiding in plain sight, disguised as everyday objects that most people would never look at twice. And here's something else that should get your heart racing. Even if you don't have the $1 million double die error, a regular 1948 wheat penny in excellent condition is still worth more than face value to collectors, especially if it's uncirculated. And if it has an S Mint mark from San Francisco, it's worth even more because the San Francisco Mint had the lowest production numbers that year. Remember, we're not just talking about checking one or two coins and giving up. Serious treasure hunters go through rolls of pennies, boxes of old coins, entire estates worth of change, because they understand that finding rare coins is a numbers game, and the more coins you examine, the better your odds of discovering something extraordinary. Metal detecting is another way people find old wheat pennies, because these coins have been dropping out of pockets, purses, and cash registers for over 75 years, settling into the soil at old home sites, parks, fairgrounds, beaches, and anywhere else people gathered, and modern metal detectors can locate these coins buried underground, giving you access to finds that nobody else has examined in decades. But don't forget what I mentioned earlier. This 1948 wheat penny isn't the only treasure we're exploring today, because coming up next, we have another wheat penny from the early 1950s that has shocked the collecting world with its own incredible value. A coin with errors so rare and so dramatic that people have literally built their retirement funds after finding just one of them, and I'm going to walk you through every single detail so you'll know exactly what to look for. The story behind that next coin involves a minting mistake that shouldn't have been possible, a quality control failure that created a handful of pennies worth more than some people earn in a lifetime. And the best part is that unlike some rare coins that only exist in museums or private collections, examples of this next coin are still being found in circulation, still turning up in old collections, still waiting for someone like you to discover them and unlock their fortune. So whatever you do, don't click away now. Don't assume you've heard everything there is to know about valuable pennies, because what's coming next will absolutely blow your mind and might just inspire you to start searching through every jar of coins you can find. Last, 1952 wheat penny. If you thought the 1948 penny was incredible, what I'm about to reveal regarding this 1952 coin will leave you absolutely speechless, because we're talking about a penny, just a simple 1-cent piece that probably passed through thousands of hands without anyone noticing anything unusual about it, a coin that looks so ordinary you'd probably use it to buy a piece of candy without thinking twice. But in reality, this particular 1952 wheat penny has sold for a staggering $5 million. Making it one of the most valuable Lincoln cents in existence. Yes, $5 million for a penny, and when you hear the full story behind this coin, when you understand the extremely rare circumstances that created it, And when you learn about the specific details that separate a regular 1952 penny worth a few cents from one worth millions, you're going to want to run to your coin collection immediately and start checking every single wheat penny you own. Because the truth is, these valuable coins are out there, they do still surface from time to time, and the person who finds the next one could see their entire financial situation transform overnight. Let me take you back to 1952, a pivotal year in American history when Dwight D. Eisenhower was running for president, when the Korean War was still raging, when television ownership was exploding across the country, and when the United States Mint was producing hundreds of millions of Lincoln wheat pennies to meet the demands of a growing economy. That year, the Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 186 million pennies, the Denver Mint produced around 746 million, and the San Francisco Mint contributed about 137 million, which means there were literally over 1 billion pennies with the date 1952 entering circulation, pennies that featured the same classic design with Abraham Lincoln on the front and the wheat stalks on the back that Americans had grown familiar with since 1909. Now, with such massive production numbers, you'd think every 1952 penny would be essentially the same, worth maybe a few cents to a collector if it's in nice condition, but absolutely nothing special in the grand scheme of rare coins. And for 99.9999% of 1952 pennies, that's exactly true. But there's a tiny fraction, an almost impossibly rare subset of 1952 wheat pennies that are completely different coins that were created due to a series of catastrophic errors at the mint, mistakes so unusual and so dramatic that when collectors first discovered them, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. The $5 million 1952 wheat penny wasn't just a regular coin. It was a combination of multiple errors occurring simultaneously, creating what numismatists call a perfect storm of minting mistakes. And the specific coin that sold for this astronomical price featured something incredibly rare called a triple die error, combined with an OFF center strike and a wrong planchet composition. Let me break down each of these errors because understanding them is crucial to knowing what to look for. A triple die error is even more rare and more dramatic than the double die we discussed with the 1948 penny. This occurs when the die used to strike the coins is accidentally impressed 3 times during its manufacturing process, with each impression slightly offset from the others, creating a tripling effect in the design that makes letters, numbers, and images appear to have not just one shadow, but 2 shadows, giving everything a bold, thick, almost 3D appearance that's absolutely unmistakable when you see it. On the $5 million 1952 penny, this tripling is most evident on the date itself, where 1952 appears to be stamped 3 times, with each digit showing clear separation between all 3 strikes, creating a layered effect that makes the date appear incredibly bold and almost seems to jump off the surface of the coin. The word liberty also shows this dramatic tripling, particularly in the vertical strokes of the letters, and In God We Trust displays the same phenomenon, with each letter appearing thickened and multiplied in a way that's impossible to miss. But the errors don't stop there. This particular coin was also struck OFF center, meaning when the planchet was fed into the press, it wasn't properly aligned, so when the die came down and stamped the design, it missed the center of the coin, resulting in part of the design being cut off or missing entirely, with a curved blank area along one edge of the coin where the die didn't make contact. Off-center errors can range from very minor, just 5 to 10% off, to dramatic, 50% or more off. And generally speaking, the more dramatic the off-center strike, the more valuable the coin becomes, because it's such an obvious and eye-catching error that even non-collectors can immediately recognize something is wrong. In the case of this $5 million penny, the strike was approximately 35% off-center, meaning more than a third of the design is missing, with the date and part of Lincoln's profile shifted way over to one side and a large crescent of blank copper visible on the opposite edge. It's the kind of error that makes you wonder how on earth it got past quality control. And then there's the third component of this perfect storm, the wrong planchet composition, And this is where things get really interesting from both a technical and a value perspective. You see, in 1952, pennies were supposed to be struck on planchets made of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, giving them that characteristic copper-red color that we all associate with pennies. But occasionally, very rarely, planchets intended for other denominations would somehow get mixed into the penny production line, or planchets made of experimental or transitional metals would accidentally be struck with penny dyes, creating coins that look similar to regular pennies but are actually made of the wrong material. The $5 million 1952 penny was struck on a planchet that was intended for a dime, meaning it's made of a copper-nickel alloy instead of pure copper. And it's also slightly smaller in diameter than a normal penny, which makes the off-center strike even more dramatic because the design is being stamped on a smaller surface than it was designed for. This wrong planchet error is exceptionally rare because mint workers typically catch these mistakes during production, and the vast majority of wrong planchet coins are destroyed before they ever leave the facility. But every once in a while, one slips through, and when it does, especially when it's combined with other major errors like a triple die and an off-center strike, you get a coin that's essentially one of a kind, a coin that represents multiple catastrophic failures in quality control, happening simultaneously, and that's what makes it worth millions. Now, beyond this specific multi-million-dollar error combination, there are other varieties of 1952 wheat pennies that are worth significant money, and it's important to know about all of them so you can properly evaluate any 1952 penny you come across. For starters, there are regular double die varieties from 1952, particularly from the Denver Mint, where the D mint mark is located just below the date on the front of the coin, and some of these Denver double dies show dramatic doubling in the date, with 1952 appearing thick and bold, and in Liberty, where each letter seems to have a strong shadow or echo. A well-preserved 1952 D double die penny can be worth anywhere from several hundred to several $1,000s depending on the strength of the doubling and the condition of the coin, and these are far more common than the multi-error coin we just discussed, which means you actually have a realistic chance of finding one. Then there are repunched mint mark varieties, where the D or S mint mark was punched into the die multiple times in slightly different positions, creating a doubled or even tripled mint mark that's visible under magnification. These varieties appeal to specialist collectors and can be worth anywhere from $50 to several $100s in nice condition. Die cracks and die breaks are also worth watching for on 1952 pennies, because as the dies wore out from striking millions of coins, they would develop cracks that would create raised lines on the finished coins, and in some cases, chunks of the die would actually break off, creating what's called a cud on the coin, which is a raised blob of metal where the broken area of the die allowed extra metal to squish up. Major cuds can be worth hundreds of dollars, and they're relatively easy to spot because they look like raised bumps or blobs on the surface of the coin. Another error to watch for is the BIE variety, which occurs when a small die crack develops between the B and E in Liberty, creating what looks like a tiny vertical line or letter I between those two letters, spelling out Liberty instead of Liberty. It's a small error, but collectors love it, and BIE varieties can add significant value to an otherwise ordinary coin. Lamination errors are another fascinating type of mistake that occurred occasionally on 1952 pennies, where the metal planchet itself was defective, containing impurities or air bubbles that caused the surface of the coin to peel or flake off in layers, creating a coin that looks like it's peeling like a sunburn. Depending on how dramatic the lamination error is, these coins can be worth anywhere from $20 to several $100s. There are also struck-through errors where some foreign object, a piece of wire, a scrap of metal, a fragment of cloth, or even grease, was on the die or the planchet when the coin was struck, and that object prevented part of the design from being transferred properly, leaving a blank or weakly struck area on the finished coin in the shape of whatever object was in the way, and these errors can be quite valuable, especially if the struck-through object left an interesting or dramatic Pattern. So how do you actually go about finding these valuable 1952 wheat pennies? First, you need to gather all the pennies you can from every possible source, check your own change, go through old jars and piggy banks, ask older family members if they have any old coins saved, visit estate sales and garage sales where people are selling off collections of household items that might include old coins, and consider buying rolls of pennies from your bank and searching through them, because even though the odds of finding a super rare error are slim, the odds of finding moderately valuable varieties are actually pretty good if you're persistent. When examining your pennies, always start by checking the date and mint mark. Make sure you're looking at 1952 specifically, and note whether there's a D, Denver, or S, San Francisco, below the date, or no mint mark at all, Philadelphia. Then get out your magnification. A good 10x jeweler's loupe is perfect for this work and doesn't cost much. And examine the date very carefully for any signs of doubling or tripling, looking for that telltale separation between the digits that indicates a die error. Move on to Liberty and check each letter for doubling, paying special attention to the vertical strokes in letters like L, I, B, T, and Y. Then check In God We Trust along the top curve of the coin, again looking for any doubling or tripling of the letters. Examine the mint mark if there is one, using your magnification to see if it appears to be punched more than once. You're looking for notches, extra outlines, or a doubled appearance to the D or S. Check the overall strike of the coin by looking at whether the design is centered properly. If you see a curved blank area along one edge with part of the design cut off, you've got an off-center strike, and the more off-center it is, the more valuable it typically is. Look at the rim of the coin because sometimes you can spot wrong planchet errors by comparing the rim thickness and overall diameter to a normal penny. If something seems off, if the coin seems slightly smaller or lighter or a different color than normal, it might be struck on the wrong planchet. Also inspect the surface of the coin very carefully for any lamination issues, looking for areas where the metal seems to be peeling or flaking, and check for any raised lines, die cracks, or raised blobs, cuds, that might indicate a die break error. Color can also give you clues. Most 1952 pennies should have that classic copper red color, though circulated ones may have darkened to brown over the decades. But if you find one that's silver or gray in color, that's a huge red flag that it might be struck on a wrong planchet made of a different metal, and you should get it examined immediately. Once you've identified a coin that might be valuable, the next step is to protect it properly. Never clean the coin, because cleaning removes the natural patina and can dramatically reduce the value, even if you think you're making it look better. Store it in a protective holder designed for coins, like a flip or a capsule, and keep it somewhere safe where it won't get scratched, dropped, or exposed to harsh environmental conditions. Then, get it professionally authenticated and graded by one of the major grading services like PCGS or NGC, because even if you're 100% certain you found a valuable error, you'll need third-party verification to sell it for top dollar, and these grading companies have expert authenticators who can confirm whether your error is genuine and assign it an accurate grade based on its condition. The grading process involves sending your coin to the company. They have detailed instructions on their websites, paying a fee, which varies based on the declared value of the coin, and waiting for them to examine it, authenticate it, verify the error variety, assign a numerical grade from 1 to 70, and seal it in a tamper-proof holder with a label showing all the details. And once you have that professionally graded coin in hand, you can sell it through auction houses to specialized dealers, or even through online marketplaces that cater to serious collectors, and you'll get the maximum possible value because buyers trust the authentication and grading. But let me give you some realistic expectations here. The $5 million 1952 penny is an absolute outlier, a coin so rare that there may only be 1 or 2 examples in existence, and your chances of finding that specific combination of errors are incredibly slim, almost like winning the lottery. However, your chances of finding a 1952 penny worth $50 or $200 or even $1,000 or more are actually pretty decent if you're willing to put in the time and examine enough coins, because mint errors, while rare, are not impossibly rare, and they do show up with some regularity for people who actively search. I've heard countless stories of people who bought a $25 box of pennies from their bank, spent a few evenings sorting through them, and found a double die or off-center strike worth several $100s, more than covering the cost of buying and searching multiple boxes. I've heard about estate sales where someone bought a jar of old coins for $10 and found a 1952 error worth $800 inside. I've heard about kids who inherited a coin collection from a grandparent, spent time actually looking up what they had, and discovered that mixed in with all the common coins was a 1952 variety worth enough to pay for a semester of college. The point is, these stories are real, these finds happen all the time, and there's no reason it couldn't happen to you if you're willing to educate yourself about what to look for and then actually take the time to search. The beautiful thing about coin collecting and error hunting is that it requires very little money to get started. All you need is a magnifying glass, access to some coins, which you probably already have or can easily obtain, and the knowledge of what to look for, which you're getting right now by watching content like this. And here's something else to think about. The value of rare coins has been steadily increasing over time. Because there's a limited supply, only so many error coins were ever made, and that number can only decrease as coins are lost or damaged over time. While demand from collectors keeps growing as more people get into the hobby, and as wealthy investors realize that rare coins can be an excellent alternative investment that often outperforms stocks or real estate. This means that even if you find a 1952 error that's only worth a few $100s today, if you hold on to it for 10 or 20 years, it could be worth thousands, especially if it's in good condition and properly preserved. The hobby of numismatics has been around for centuries, and it's not going anywhere. As long as humans value history, artistry, and rarity, rare coins will have tremendous value, and errors in particular will always be sought after because they represent unique mistakes that can never be replicated, making each error coin a genuine one-of-a-kind treasure. So what should you do right now after hearing all this information? First, go through your change and your coin jars. Take the time to actually look at the dates on your pennies and pull out any wheat pennies you find. You can identify them by the wheat stalks on the back instead of the Lincoln Memorial that appears on pennies from 1959 onward. Sort them by date and look specifically for 1948 and 1952 coins, but honestly, examine all your wheat pennies because there are valuable errors and varieties from many different years, not just the ones we discussed today. Get yourself a magnifying loupe if you don't already have one. You can find them online or at hobby stores for very reasonable prices, and it will be the best investment you ever make if it helps you spot a valuable error. Educate yourself about errors and varieties by watching videos like this, reading coin collecting books and websites, and joining online communities where collectors share their finds and help each other identify errors. There's a whole community of people who love this hobby and are happy to help newcomers learn. Consider visiting a local coin shop and talking to the dealer there. Show them any coins you think might be valuable and ask for their opinion, because experienced dealers have seen thousands of coins and can often spot errors or varieties in seconds that might take you hours to identify. And most importantly, don't give up if the first few coins you examine turn out to be common. Remember, finding rare errors is a numbers game, and the more coins you look through, the better your chances become. Some people search through thousands of pennies before finding anything noteworthy. But when they do finally find that one error coin, that one variety worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, suddenly all those hours of searching feel completely worth it, and they're hooked on the hobby for life. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of discovery, the excitement of holding something genuinely rare and valuable that you found yourself through knowledge and persistence. That's what makes coin collecting such an addictive and rewarding hobby, and it's why millions of people around the world dedicate their time to searching for these hidden treasures. Now imagine for a moment what it would be like to find one of these multi-million-dollar pennies. Imagine going through an old collection or sorting through a jar of change and suddenly realizing that you're holding something worth more than most people's houses, something that could completely transform your financial situation, pay off your debts, fund your retirement, or make your dreams come true. That's not just fantasy, that's a real possibility for anyone who takes the time to learn what to look for and then actively searches. Because these coins are out there, they do still exist, and every single year, new examples of rare errors are discovered by ordinary people who simply took the time to look. So keep your eyes open, examine your pennies carefully. Never assume that a coin is worthless just because it looks ordinary. And remember that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone observant enough to recognize their true value. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this deep dive into the fascinating world of valuable wheat pennies. I hope this information helps you discover something amazing, and if you do find a valuable coin, come back and share your story because I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, keep searching, keep learning, and keep believing that the next coin you examine could be the one that changes everything.